and you should get angry as we go. The first credible reference to Junia as a male comes from a guy named Aegidius in Rome in the 13th century. All up before that, female. 13th century, Aegidius in the late Middle Ages just suddenly changed it to a male without any explanation. Just kind of in there. 2 centuries later, in 1512, a guy named Jacques Lefebvre, or Lefebvre, I don't speak French well, also considered her a man, even though in the Latin translation available to him, it was clearly a female. 10 years later, Martin Luther's influential German New Testament appeared. This is one of the first New Testaments in the vernacular, which means it was written in the common person's language, because most texts up to that point were in the Latin. He translated it into the German, so the Bible could get into the hands of every person, the individual readers. But he also, following Lefebvre, designated Junia a male, without any explanation. In his works, we find the following. This is how he translates Romans 16:7. Greet Andronicus the manly one, and Junius of the Junioan family, who are men of note among the apostles. That's his translation of Romans 16:7. Yet this sex change operation occurred without a shred of evidence or even an attempt at persuasion. Junia became Junius simply because, according to Luther's and others like him, a woman couldn't possibly be an apostle. And it met with no resistance because people just trusted what they read as the Bible. They didn't have any education or knowledge to challenge it. No persuasion was needed. The church could just tell people how it was. Nevertheless, beginning with Erasmus in 1516, all of the Greek New Testaments considered Junia female. Every Greek you'd find would have that tick over the eye signifying this person was a female. This continued throughout all of history until 1927 with the 13th Nestle edition. And this isn't Nestle chocolate. It is Nestle, a guy who did Greek New Testaments. They inexplicably, in 1927, changed the accent from the acute, the tick feminine, to the squiggly circumflex over the A. And this is the major Greek New Testament that scholars, pastors use. Suddenly it changes to denote masculine. Think about it, 1927. What's kind of going on in the world in 1927? Well, at this point, early 20th century, some churches are starting to consider ordaining women. Women have started taking jobs during World War I. As all the men left, they started becoming bankers and all these things. And they didn't want to just go back to being in the home after that. So more of these issues, the woman question came into, what are women's roles? And do they have jobs? All these things. There's all these issues coming up in 1927, the 1920s. So they suddenly decide, let's change this to a male name. Let's not add any more fuel to the fire. Women are starting to think they can have all these different roles in society. We don't want them thinking they can be ministers and apostles and be equal in church. Let's change it to a male. Because if there's a female apostle, they can say, hey, there's a female apostle in the early church, why can't we be ministers? Let's make it into a male. Anybody angry yet? Should be. Where was the rage then, though? Where was the rage? It was nowhere, because no one really ever cared to examine these little verses. No one read the Greek. No one studied. Ignorance is often our greatest enemy. If you want to control a group, a nation, a people, keep them ignorant. Make them think they don't need to know all of that. Make them think that all you need to know is just a few basic principles, a couple of little sentences, and that's all you need to know. We often do that in church. All you need to know is just these 2 facts, and then you're good. That's dangerous, because then you can control that group. You can say, oh yeah, Jesus wants you to have slaves. Jesus wants you to keep some people inferior. Because if all you need to know is just 1 or 2 little basic principles, you can be controlled. Ignorance is one of our greatest enemies. I have here a Greek edition. This is a 24th edition. The 13th was the first one that switched to the feminine. This is 1960. And if you want to, you can come up afterwards and look, but you can see in the Iunian, it has the circumflex over the A, 1960. This continued up even with the 27th edition in 1993. We think we're kind of modern in 1993. All this stuff with inclusive language come out. But even in 1993, Greek edition still male. Then suddenly, with this edition right here, the 27th, printed in 1998, they suddenly switch it back to the tick over the I, female. 1998, suddenly just switch it with no explanation, no reasoning. So we have two Greek New Testaments here, one male, one female. I also have this fun little bit here. This is called an interlinear Bible. It has the Greek in it, then it has a translation right under it, and then on the margin it has the authorized version, or what we call the King James Version. This is my most fun one right here. On the King James Version, it's translated junia, feminine. In the Greek, it has the tick over the I, the acute accent, meaning female. But they translate it right under the female Greek, male. This was done in 1948. So apparently she's female right here and male right here. Hermaphrodite apostle? I don't know. What's going on in the world in 1948, though? These similar things. I mean, the Greek says right there female, but they translate it male. Something is wrong, right? Something is definitely wrong. But now, in most Bibles, you'll find female. Not all. The NIV still has it male. NRSV has it female. NAS has it female. Living Bible, male. New Jerusalem Bible, male. As an experiment, go home and look at some of your Bibles, especially ones before 1990. Some will have male, some will have female. King James Version will have female. Any of these kind of newer contemporary American ones are probably going to have a male. So I hope this has been kind of an interesting little trek into text criticism, what kind of scholars and ministers look at sometimes. But why? What's the point? Why does all this matter? Why preach this other than making you kind of angry at people for just saying, hey, women, sorry, you stink. That's kind of the message there. Why does it all matter? First is the obvious question of women's leadership in the church, of which we support as evidenced by our female elders and the fact that this churches around here had histories of female pastors. But not every church in Peoria believes women should be ordained as ministers or elders. Some churches, even in our own presbytery, have never had a female pastor because they really don't want that at all. Sometimes I get asked questions of people visiting the church because they've come from traditions where they didn't ordain women, and they say, well, why do you ordain women? Well, doesn't this text say they should be silent in church? And it's important for the whole church to know some of this information because you may get asked. You need to be able to give support of why. How many female people have been ordained elders here? You need to be able to give reasons why you're an elder. You should be able to know. You should know this story. You should know the text criticism behind Paul's be silent church. You should be able to talk about why maybe that isn't valid. Give all the reasons historically and scripturally, because sometimes people will challenge you on that, and they're wrong. So that's part of the reason. There is biblical warrant for this. Junia was a female apostle. And the church has had a history of kind of changing things. The whole idea, who has ever heard that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute? Anybody ever heard that? That was made up later. It's not scriptural, but it was made up later because trying to discredit Mary Magdalene because she was getting too much press as a possible disciple of Jesus. So later, like the 12th century, people started saying, oh yeah, she was a prostitute beforehand. Do that in there. That's one reason. Second, we need to be able, as a church as a whole, to admit when we've been wrong on things. Humans, and I have this tendency, we hate to admit when we've been wrong, don't we? We hate to just kind of say, yeah, I messed up on that one. I was totally mistaken. We don't like that. And the church especially hates doing that. It took hundreds and hundreds of years for the church to say, sorry, Galileo, you were right, we were wrong. Hundreds of years on that. We struggle admitting when we've been wrong. And that's why people often come to church and say, y'all are a bunch of hypocrites. Because we say one thing and act another way. We don't like to admit when we've been wrong. If we could just say from the beginning, you know what, we have a bad history of this or that. Like, yeah, we let slavery happen for way too long and didn't say much about it. We tried to